my God, I still can't believe I let things get this far. It's been months, and every time I look at my wife, Sarah, I still hear her words ringing in my ears. She stood there, completely unfazed, looking at me with this irritating smirk on her face, after I'd just spent 10 minutes trying to politely escort her ex-boyfriend Mark out of our house. Mark, by the way, was not taking the hint. He was lounging on my sofa, making himself comfortable, and recounting some hilarious story from their college days. I was furious. My blood was boiling, and I felt completely disrespected in my own home. That's when Sarah, my own wife, walked over to me, patted my shoulder like I was a little kid, and whispered, loud enough for Mark to hear, "Babe, you're making a scene. Why don't you try to act like a man and just deal with it? Act like a man." Those 4 words are what sent me over the edge. They made me see red, and they were the catalyst for the single most dramatic, risky, and frankly shocking thing I have ever done in my entire life. I need to know truly, right now, before I tell you the rest. Was I wrong for what I did to reclaim my respect? Or was my action the only logical response to that kind of humiliation? This whole nightmare started innocently enough, as all the best ones do. Sarah and I had been married for 5 wonderful years, and we'd been together for 7. We had a great life, a beautiful little house, stable jobs, and a mutual love for terrible B-movies. Our relationship was built on a foundation of trust, communication, and most importantly, mutual respect. Or so I thought. The only real persistent shadow in our otherwise sunny existence was Mark. Mark wasn't just an ex. He was the ex, the one she dated seriously in college, the one whose name would occasionally slip out during a nostalgic moment, the one she swore was just a friend now, but whose continued presence always felt like a low, irritating buzz in the background of our marriage. He was the classic tall, dark, and annoyingly charming guy who, despite being married himself, seemed to treat every one of his interactions with Sarah as a chance to subtly remind me of their shared history. I'd always tried to be the mature, secure husband. "It's fine, honey. He's your friend," I'd say, forcing a smile when she told me he'd called. "Of course you can grab coffee," I'd lie, knowing I hated every minute of it. I told myself that my security in our marriage was more important than my ego. Then came the weekend of the infamous visit. Mark was in town for a conference, and Sarah, without consulting me first, had offered him a place to stay for 2 nights. When she told me, I was immediately uncomfortable. I remember my voice was tight when I finally managed to speak. "Stay here, Sarah. We have a guest room, sure. But why here? Can't he get a hotel?" She waved her hand dismissively, already back to scrolling on her phone. "Don't be ridiculous, Dave. He's an old friend. It's silly to waste money on a hotel when we have a perfectly good room. Don't be so insecure." That word, insecure, was her favorite weapon. It shut me down every time. The moment you argue against a perceived insecurity, you've already lost. "So," I conceded, telling myself that it was just 2 days, and I could handle it. I spent the next 48 hours being the perfect host, which translated to me being the invisible husband. Mark acted like a guest, but also like he owned the place. He'd raid our fridge, change the channel mid-game to some obscure documentary I didn't care about, and, worst of all, he'd engage Sarah in these long, deeply familiar conversations about people and events I had absolutely no context for, leaving me standing awkwardly in my own living room. I felt like a side character in my own marriage. The climax of this low-grade torture happened on the 2nd night. We were all sitting in the living room, and I was trying to talk about my new project at work, something I was genuinely excited about. Mark cut me off mid-sentence, turning to Sarah with this patronizing look. "Oh, honey, remember that time in Cabo when we..." And then proceeded to tell a story about a drunken, beachside escapade that was clearly designed to make me feel small. Sarah laughed a little too hard, a little too fondly. I reached my breaking point. I stood up, interrupting their laughter, and my voice was firm, though I was shaking inside. "Mark," I said, my tone as polite as I could manage. "It's getting late, and you have that conference tomorrow. I think it's time you headed up to the guest room." Mark didn't move. He actually looked at me like I was a piece of furniture that had suddenly spoken. "Oh, chill out, man," he said, taking a slow sip of his drink. Just finishing my story. That was the moment. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about friendship or convenience. This was a power play, and both of them were in on it. I tried again, my voice rising. "No, I'm serious. It's time to go." And that is when Sarah walked over, patted my shoulder like a dog, and delivered the soul-crushing line, "Babe, you're making a scene. Why don't you try to act like a man and just deal with it?" I walked away. I couldn't trust myself to speak without exploding. I went straight into our bedroom, slammed the door, and spent the next hour pacing, my heart hammering against my ribs. Act like a man. The irony was staggering. She saw my respectful, controlled effort to protect my space in my marriage as a weakness, as something unmanly. What did she think acting like a man meant? Being loud, aggressive, dominant? I realized that my attempts to be the understanding, mature partner had been interpreted as passivity, and it had opened the door for this kind of blatant disrespect. I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling a profound and cold clarity wash over me. I finally understood the game, and I decided, in that instant, that if she wanted me to act like a man, I would give her a show she would never forget. A show that would demonstrate exactly what a man, a husband, does to protect his home and his dignity. The thought formed in my mind, cold and precise, and I knew there was no going back. So that's the situation I was in. I was humiliated in my own home by a guest and, worse, by my own wife, who dared me to be something different. I felt like my entire personality and approach to our relationship were being mocked and challenged. I had to make a choice. Let it go and be forever known as the passive husband, or make a move that would permanently re-establish the boundaries of our marriage and my role in it. Before I tell you what happened next, what the revenge was, what I actually did that night that changed everything, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have let it slide for the sake of peace? Or would you have decided to finally act like a man and teach them both a painful lesson? Let me know, because I truly still struggle with the morality of my final decision. When I finally opened that bedroom door, I wasn't the man who had slammed it shut an hour ago. I was calm, deliberate, and focused. I walked directly past the living room, where Mark and Sarah were still talking, blissfully unaware of the silent storm I was brewing. I went straight to the garage, retrieved a large, empty cardboard box and a roll of industrial-strength duct tape. When I re-entered the house, I was carrying these items with an unnerving casualness. Mark paused his story, finally looking at me with a flicker of something other than disdain, maybe mild curiosity. Sarah watched, her arms crossed, still wearing that little smirk. I didn't say a word. I walked straight up to Mark, who was still lounging comfortably on my sofa. I placed the box on the floor right by his feet. Then, very slowly, I walked over to the TV, unplugged it, wound the cord, and placed the whole thing neatly into the box. I did the same with the modem, the router, and the charging dock for the living room speaker. Mark started to look confused. "Hey man, what are you doing?" he asked, a trace of annoyance now in his voice. I still didn't speak. I simply taped the box shut with a few aggressive rips of the duct tape. Then, I turned my attention to Mark's luggage, which was sitting neatly by the staircase. I picked up his 2 suitcases, my wife's eyes finally widening with a hint of panic. "Dave, what are you doing?" "Stop!" she finally exclaimed. I didn't stop. I walked to the front door, opened it wide, and placed the taped-up box and his 2 suitcases directly on the welcome mat outside. The cold night air immediately flooded the living room. Then, I turned back to Mark, my face a mask of complete composure. "Mark," I said, my voice low and steady, projecting a calm, terrifying authority I didn't know I possessed. My wife told me to act like a man and deal with the situation. As the man of this house, I have determined the situation is you, overstaying your welcome and disrespecting my marriage. I paused, letting the silence hang heavy. The situation has been dealt with. You have 30 seconds to collect your phone, wallet, and keys, and join your luggage outside. You are no longer welcome to stay here. I will not be repeating myself. The silence was deafening. Sarah was sputtering, a mix of rage and shock on her face. Mark, however, looked completely and utterly stunned. His charming facade crumbled, replaced by a genuine fear. He knew I was serious. He knew I had crossed a line Sarah had pushed me over, and he was the victim of the fallout. He scrambled, grabbing his items, his movements jerky and panicked. He shot a confused, angry look at Sarah, who was completely immobilized. He didn't say goodbye. He just muttered a frantic, "I'll call you, Sarah," and practically ran out the front door into the chilly night. I immediately and firmly closed and locked the door, not with a slam, but with a deliberate, satisfying click. The confrontation that followed with Sarah was monumental. She absolutely tore into me. "You ruined everything. You were a complete jerk. You embarrassed me. Where is he supposed to go?" That was insane. I stood my ground, unwavering. I acted like a man, Sarah. I protected my home and my boundaries. You invited disrespect into our house, and then shamed me for not being man enough to accept it. You got what you asked for. I won't be disrespected in my own marriage. Our fight lasted for hours. It was brutal and raw, but it was also the first truly honest conversation we had had in a long time. She realized I wasn't going to back down. She realized the depth of the humiliation she had inflicted upon me with her careless words. I didn't yell. I spoke with cold, hard facts about how her passive allowance of Mark's behavior had slowly eroded my sense of worth in our relationship. The aftermath was difficult. Mark ended up getting an expensive, last-minute hotel room and left town the next morning without calling her back. The initial shock gave way to a strained tension, but slowly, that tension started to break down the walls we had built. Sarah eventually haltingly apologized, not just for her words, but for her complete lack of awareness about how her relationship with Mark was affecting me. The key takeaway from the whole mess was that sometimes being a man or being a good partner isn't about being passive and secure. It's about setting clear, non-negotiable boundaries, even if it means creating a massive scene. We're still working on things, but the dynamic has fundamentally shifted. I am no longer the husband who is afraid to speak up, and she is no longer the wife who can wield the word insecure as a weapon. The silent threat of the taped-up box is enough. The moral of this whole incredibly messy, dramatic story, I guess, is that respect is something you have to demand, not something you can just hope for. Don't let anyone, especially your partner, define your worth or your masculinity by whether you can passively swallow disrespect. If they challenge you to act like a man, be prepared to deliver the kind of action they were absolutely not expecting. An action that defines the boundaries of your self-respect. If you are on my side in this whole crazy situation, please like this video right now to show your support. Subscribe for more stories like this, where I break down the craziest things people do when pushed to the limit. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. Do you think I went too far, or was it the necessary shock therapy for my marriage? I'll see you all in the next story.